Ethan Hartman stood on the balcony of his private suite, the Atlantic breeze tugging at the cuffs of his crisp white shirt. Below, the waves rolled onto the shore in hushed applause, the sun dissolving into a bruised horizon of lavender and gold. To his left, the soft murmur of the hotel's rooftop bar drifted upward, clinking glasses, low laughter, a jazz saxophone weaving through it all. He sipped his scotch, aged 25 years, poured just 2 fingers deep. Even the glass was weighted, hand-cut crystal, another detail carefully chosen by the hotel's management to please their most important guest. It should have been perfect. This was what Ethan excelled at, orchestrating perfection. He had arrived at the White Sands Resort 3 days ago, checked into the top-floor suite with the kind of effortless authority that turned heads and hushed bellboys. For the staff, he was the man whose hotels dotted every skyline from Miami to Los Angeles, the billionaire CEO who'd reshaped luxury for a generation. For Ethan, this trip was supposed to be a brief escape from meetings, boardroom battles, and the polite blood sport of mergers. But as he stood alone watching the last sliver of sun disappear, Ethan felt the familiar ache beneath the success, the sharp, hollow pang of a man who had everything but peace. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen. 14 missed calls. His assistant, Claire, had texted twice to remind him about the London expansion. His general counsel had flagged a lawsuit brewing in New York. And there, he caught himself before tapping, was a message from someone he hadn't seen in 6 years, Maya Collins. He stared at her name, heart tripping in his chest. Then, with the precision of a man who built his life on control, he clicked the phone off and slipped it into his pocket. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. Ethan had come here to be no one, not a CEO, not a billionaire, not the man who, 6 years ago, watched the only woman he'd ever loved walk away and never come back. The next morning followed the same disciplined rhythm: black coffee, a 5-mile run along the coast, an hour on his laptop scanning quarterly reports. Ethan prided himself on efficiency. Even on vacation, his days ran like a well-oiled machine, each moment accounted for, each encounter kept at arm's length. He didn't chat with the other guests at breakfast. He didn't linger at the pool. He didn't, under any circumstances, let anyone believe they might know him. "Good morning, Mr. Hartman," the concierge said when he passed through the lobby. He offered a polite nod. No smile. He preferred it that way. But underneath the polished surface, a quiet battle simmered. Ethan had built an empire on predicting what people wanted before they even spoke it. He knew how to craft desire, package it, sell it, and walk away with a billion-dollar deal. But what he hadn't mastered, what no one taught you in boardrooms or business school, was how to sit still in your own life. What did it mean when the world called you successful, but your own home echoed with silence? What did it mean when every room you entered was filled with admiration, but you went to bed alone? Ethan pressed his palms to the balcony railing, his jaw tightening. He thought he had made peace with that, until Maya's name had flashed on his screen. That evening he chose a quiet table at the rooftop restaurant, away from the couples clinking champagne and the families celebrating birthdays. He ordered grilled halibut, a glass of Sancerre, and opened the leather-bound book he'd brought, pretending the words could pull him into a world where his name wasn't whispered in Forbes circles and where no one expected him to have the answers. That's when he felt it. The weight of a gaze. It prickled at the edge of his awareness, not the hungry stare of a fan or the polished smile of a hotel manager, but something smaller, sharper, curious. He looked up. Near the terrace edge, 3 little girls stood in a row. The oldest, maybe 7, clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. The middle one twisted a strand of hair nervously. And the youngest, God, the youngest, wore a tiny floral dress, her dark hair braided neatly, and over her left eye, a soft pink eye patch. They weren't laughing or playing. They were watching him. Ethan froze. Children weren't part of his world. He didn't know what to say to them, didn't know how to soften his voice or bend his posture the way other men did. He waited for their mother or a nanny to appear, but none came. The girl with the eye patch tilted her head, examining him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. He forced himself to look away, to sip his wine, to go back to his book. But the pages blurred. What the hell was this? Why couldn't he shake the feeling that something was shifting, breaking open in the quiet corners of his carefully guarded life? For the first time in years, Ethan Hartman felt the ground beneath him tilt, and he didn't have a single plan for how to stop it. Ethan didn't sleep well that night. Even with the blackout curtains drawn, even with the soft hum of the ocean outside, his mind refused to quiet. He lay in the dark, one arm bent beneath his head, the other resting across the cold side of the bed where no one ever lay. Every time he closed his eyes, they came back. The girls' faces, watching him from across the terrace. Especially the little one with the pink eye patch, her gaze sharp and unwavering, like she saw straight through the layers of his carefully built armor. By morning, he'd convinced himself it didn't matter. He'd leave it alone. Kids stare, he told himself. Curious, unpredictable. It was nothing. It was only nothing until it became something. The next evening, Ethan returned to the rooftop restaurant at his usual hour. The sky was bruised with dusk, the sea breeze cool against his skin as he took his usual corner table, back to the railing, facing the horizon. He ordered an old-fashioned this time, determined to unwind. The waiter, a young man named Carlos, who was too polite to fawn but too eager to ignore Ethan's status, brought the drink with a respectful nod. Ethan was halfway through reading an email on his phone when the stillness broke. "Excuse me," a small voice said. He looked up slowly. They were back. All three girls stood at the edge of his table, silent, watchful, almost eerily composed. The youngest, the one with the eye patch, stepped forward. Her tiny hands were clasped in front of her. She tilted her head, that same direct, unsettling gaze fixed on him. "Are you Mr. Ethan?" she asked, her voice clear, no babyish lisp, just calm curiosity. Ethan's throat tightened. He set his phone down carefully. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "I'm Ethan." The girl's shoulders relaxed the tiniest bit. She glanced back at her sisters, then turned to him again. "Our mommy said if we ever saw you," she said softly, "we should come say hello." For a moment Ethan's world tilted. He stared at the three girls, their matching chestnut hair, their pale blue eyes that, God help him, looked a little too much like his own. His chest constricted, a cold thread winding through his heart. "Your mother?" His voice cracked in a way he hated. "Who's your mother?" The middle girl spoke up then, her thumb slipping nervously into her mouth. "Mommy's name is Maya." The name hit him like a punch. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 6 years. Not once. Maya. 1,000 memories surged forward, her laugh in the dark, the way she used to tuck her feet beneath his on cold nights, the last time she walked out the door without looking back. He gripped the edge of the table. "Where is your mom?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Where's Maya now?" The oldest girl, Olivia, spoke quietly. "She went to get medicine 2 days ago." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. 2 days? These girls had been alone for 2 days? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "Where's your room? Do you have someone with you?" They shook their heads. The eye patch girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo, holding it up with both hands. Ethan took it carefully. It was an old picture. Him and Maya laughing on a beach, wind in their hair, arms wrapped around each other, careless and young. His breath caught. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but there was no mistaking it. "I told you," the little one whispered, looking up at her sisters. "He's the one." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His whole life, every controlled, polished inch of it, had just cracked open. An hour later, he sat in the hotel lounge, the girls bundled on a couch nearby with cocoa and a plate of shortbread cookies Julia, the concierge, had personally delivered. Ethan leaned against the bar, phone pressed to his ear. "Claire," he murmured to his assistant when she answered, "I need you to get me Lucas Grady's number. Tonight. He's still doing private work, right? Tell him it's urgent." Claire, unflappable as ever, didn't even blink. "What's happened, Ethan?" He swallowed. "I think Maya's in trouble." His voice softened as he glanced back at the girls, watching them huddle together in a tangle of tiny limbs, their heads bent toward the cookies. "I think," he added quietly, "I have daughters." There was a pause on the line, something rare, almost tender. "I'll handle it," Claire said softly. "And Ethan? Be careful. You don't have to do this alone." He ended the call and ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. When he turned back to the girls, Julia approached, her sharp eyes softening as they flicked between him and the children. "They trust you already," she murmured. "That's saying something." Ethan gave a low, humorless laugh. "I'm not sure I trust myself." Julia tilted her head, watching him. "Sometimes," she said, "that's where it all starts." And for the first time in years, Ethan felt it, not the cold weight of responsibility or the hollow thrill of achievement, but something warmer, scarier, the first crack of his heart beginning to open. The hotel suite had never felt so small. Ethan sat at the edge of the plush sofa, elbows on his knees, phone clutched tight in one hand as his eyes flicked toward the girls curled up on the other end of the couch. Olivia had dozed off first, head heavy on a velvet cushion. Sophie lay draped across her sister, thumb still in her mouth. And Bella, the smallest, the fiercest, sat cross-legged, clutching her stuffed bunny, wide awake beneath her pink eye patch. She hadn't taken her gaze off Ethan for an hour. He ran a hand through his hair, still waiting for Lucas, the private investigator, to return his call. The air between them pulsed with quiet tension, heavy with questions neither Ethan nor Bella knew how to ask. He wasn't sure who broke the silence first. "Are you rich?" Bella asked suddenly, her voice as matter-of-fact as if she were asking the time. Ethan looked up, startled. "What?" She tilted her head. "Mommy said you're rich, that you make big buildings." Her eye, clear, piercing blue, blinked once. "Are you?" He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah," he murmured, leaning back. "I guess you could say that." Bella nodded solemnly, as if ticking off a mental list. Then, softer, "Are you nice?" The question hit him square in the chest. Ethan parted his lips to answer, but nothing came. Was he nice? He could negotiate billion-dollar deals in under an hour. He could sign contracts that made or broke lives. But was he kind? Was he good? He'd never had to answer that. Before he could fumble his way through a reply, the suite door opened. "Mr. Hartman?" Julia's crisp voice floated in as she peeked inside, her usual poise softened by concern. "I just spoke to the local police. No reports, no missing persons notice filed under Maya Collins, and your investigator left a message. He's on his way." Ethan exhaled, nodding, but Julia didn't leave. Instead, she stepped inside and quietly approached the couch, crouching down so she was eye level with Bella. "Sweetheart," Julia murmured, her hand gentle on Bella's knee. "Why don't you come with me to the kitchen? We've got ice cream. You can help me pick the toppings." Bella hesitated, then, without a word, slid off the couch and reached for Julia's hand. As the two disappeared down the hallway, Ethan pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, feeling something crack in his chest. His heart was thudding with a strange, relentless ache. It wasn't just worry about Maya. It was the way Bella looked at him, the trust in her face that he hadn't earned. It was the weight of realizing that the life he'd built, sleek, polished, unbreakable, had been made entirely for himself, and none of it mattered here. 15 minutes later, Lucas arrived. "Jesus, Ethan," Lucas murmured as he stepped inside, the faintest trace of amusement in his eyes. "When you said urgent, I didn't think you meant this." Ethan gave him a withering look. "Shut up and sit down." Lucas flopped into the armchair, tugging out a small notepad. His easy charm had always been one of his sharpest weapons. "So, tell me about Maya." Ethan dragged a hand over his jaw. "She left 6 years ago. No goodbye, no note. I didn't follow her." He closed his eyes briefly. "I thought she needed space, and maybe I needed to prove I wouldn't chase her." Lucas raised a brow, tapping his pen. "And now?" "Now," Ethan said slowly, "she's left 3 kids, her kids, maybe our kids, alone in a hotel room and vanished without a trace." Lucas's pen stilled. "Do you think they're yours?" Lucas asked quietly. Ethan stared across the room where Bella's stuffed bunny sat on the armrest. "I don't know," he murmured. "But when I look at them—" He shook his head. "They're mine now, whether I like it or not." Lucas leaned back, whistling under his breath. "All right, I'll check hospitals, local clinics, anything off the radar. You stay here, keep the girls calm." "Lucas," Ethan said, his voice low. "Find her." Lucas met his eyes, serious now, all amusement gone. "I will." Hours later, the suite was quiet again. Julia had gone home, the girls were tucked into the spare bedroom, and Ethan stood on the balcony, his hands braced on the railing, staring out at the moonlit ocean. When the soft knock came at the glass door, he turned to see Bella, bunny in hand, eye patch slightly askew. He opened the door. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head, stepping barefoot onto the cool balcony tiles. Without a word, she leaned against him, small and warm and solid. Ethan froze. And then, slowly, awkwardly, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For a long moment they stood like that, listening to the ocean. Then softly Bella whispered, "Mommy said you were lonely." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "She was right," he said, barely above a breath. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Hartman wondered what it would take to stop being alone. The following morning, Ethan barely recognized himself. He sat at the breakfast table in the suite, his usually immaculate hair tousled, his crisp shirt traded for a rumpled t-shirt he'd found at the bottom of his suitcase. Across from him, 3 little girls munched on toast and fruit, their feet swinging off the chairs, their quiet chatter filling the room like sunlight. It was disorienting. It was terrifying. It was oddly grounding. He watched as Bella smeared strawberry jam across her toast with careful precision. Olivia read the back of the cereal box like it was a novel, and Sophie, the middle one, giggled softly as she peeked into her glass of orange juice, fascinated by the bubbles. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. He could buy companies in his sleep. He could walk into any boardroom and command respect. But sitting at a breakfast table with 3 children, trying to figure out if they needed more milk or another napkin, that was foreign territory. Julia, the concierge, breezed in then, her arms full of clean towels and a warm smile softening her sharp features. "Good morning, Mr. Hartman," she said, casting a knowing glance at the scene. "Or should I say, Dad of the Year?" Ethan shot her a tired look. though the corner of his mouth tugged upward. "I'm improvising." Julia chuckled, setting the towels on the counter. "You're doing better than half the dads I know." Her tone softened. "Any word?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Lucas is still searching. Nothing from the police. Hospitals haven't reported anyone fitting Maya's description." He tried to keep his voice even, but Julia caught the crack in it. She moved closer, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. "You'll find her." The words hit him deeper than he expected. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of exhaustion and fear pressing into his chest. He exhaled slowly, then gave a brief nod. "I need to step out for a bit," he murmured. "Clear my head." Julia nodded toward the girls. "I'll stay with them." Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know." Julia smiled, gentle but firm. "Go." Outside, the salty wind whipped against Ethan's skin as he walked the narrow path that curved along the rocky coastline. Waves slapped against the shore, gulls cawed overhead, and for the first time in days, Ethan let his mind drift. Maya. She was the first woman who had ever challenged him, ever seen past the glossy magazine covers, the bank statements, the billion-dollar deals. She'd seen the man beneath the empire, and she'd left when the empire swallowed him whole. He hadn't fought for her then. He'd told himself it was respect, that she needed space. But now, staring down at the ocean, he wondered if it had been cowardice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Ethan yanked it out, heart lurching. "Lucas." "Tell me you've got something," Ethan barked as he answered. "I do," Lucas said, "but you're not going to like it." An hour later, Ethan stood in the hotel lounge, his heart pounding as Lucas filled him in. "They found her," Lucas said quietly. "Hospital in Boston, car accident, concussion, minor injuries, but—" Ethan's mouth went dry. "But what?" "She has no ID, no memory. She doesn't remember who she is." Ethan's knees nearly buckled. Maya, alive, but gone in the way that mattered most. Lucas rested a hand on Ethan's arm. "She's safe, she's stable. You can see her." Ethan swallowed hard. His fingers trembled around the phone as he texted Julia. "Keep the girls with you. I'm going to Boston." For a moment he stood frozen, heart hammering against his ribs. Then Bella's voice echoed in his head. "Mommy said you were lonely." And Ethan realized something sharp and certain. He wasn't just doing this to solve a problem. He wasn't just doing this because of guilt or responsibility. He was doing this because, for the first time in years, he wanted to bring someone home. At the hospital, Ethan braced himself before pushing open the door to Maya's room. She sat propped up in bed, a thin hospital blanket tucked around her. Her hair was shorter now, her face a little thinner, but she was still Maya. Still the woman who had once made him feel like the man behind the fortune actually mattered. Her eyes lifted as he entered. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was both familiar and devastatingly foreign, she asked softly, "Do I know you?" The words sliced through him. For a heartbeat, Ethan couldn't speak. Then, with a quiet breath, he stepped closer. "I'm Ethan," he said gently, "and you used to be my whole world." Maya tilted her head, eyes flickering across his face as if searching for a thread of recognition. He was thinking about what he might still have a chance to rebuild. Ethan barely slept that night. He sat by the suite's window as dawn crept across the sky, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. Outside, the ocean glimmered in soft pink light, waves folding onto the shore in a rhythm that mocked the chaos pounding inside his chest. He was used to power, used to control, to certainty, to walking into a room and knowing his presence carried weight. But now, with Maya's memory scattered and 3 little girls looking to him as the last familiar landmark in their world, Ethan Hartman had never felt so unsure of himself. The door behind him creaked. He turned just as Bella padded into the room, Bunny clutched to her chest, eye patch slightly askew. Wordlessly, she climbed into his lap, curling against him like she belonged there. Ethan exhaled, wrapping his arms around her small frame. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. Bella shook her head against his chest. "Dreamed about Mommy." His throat tightened. "She wants to come home," Bella whispered, as if it were a secret only they shared. Ethan pressed his cheek to the top of her head. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured. "We're going to help her find her way back." By noon, Ethan was in the hospital lobby, pacing in front of a bank of windows, as Lucas approached with a file folder in hand. "She left because of you, you know," Lucas said, no preamble. Ethan froze. "What?" Lucas gave a tight smile. "You were too much, Ethan. All of it. The money, the public life, the business that never slept. Maya got tired of feeling like she was one more deal you had to close." The words hit harder than Ethan wanted to admit. He shoved his hands into his pockets, jaw tightening. "And you waited until now to tell me this?" Lucas tilted his head. "Because you finally look ready to hear it." Ethan's eyes flicked to the elevator doors. His voice was low when he spoke again. "She's asked to see the girls." Lucas softened. "That's a good sign." "It's a terrifying sign," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "What if she looks at them and still remembers nothing? What if they're just strangers to her?" Lucas clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're not in a boardroom anymore, Ethan. You can't out-negotiate love. You have to sit in the mess and wait." It was the last thing Ethan wanted to hear. The hospital room felt smaller this time. Maya was propped up with more color in her cheeks, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, the notebook still within reach on the bedside table. When Ethan entered, Bella slipped her hand into his without hesitation. Olivia and Sophie trailed behind, quieter but wide-eyed. Maya's gaze locked on them the moment they stepped in. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Bella did what none of them could. She walked forward, unhurried, climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, and placed her beloved Bunny in Maya's lap. Maya's fingers trembled as they closed around the worn toy. She let out a shaky breath, her lips parting in a soundless whisper. "Bella." The name came out like a question, fragile, searching, but it was enough. Bella nodded solemnly and leaned into her mother's side. Olivia and Sophie rushed forward next, small bodies climbing, arms wrapping, the air filling with soft hiccups of laughter and tears. Ethan stood back, chest tight, watching the woman he'd loved fold slowly, achingly, into the shape of a mother again. Maya's eyes lifted to his. "I still don't remember everything," she whispered, voice raw. Ethan's throat worked around the knot rising there. "You're here," he murmured. "That's more than enough." That evening, back at the hotel, Ethan sat on the balcony with a whiskey in hand, the girls finally asleep, the ocean humming below. Julia slipped outside, setting 2 mugs of tea on the railing. "She asked for you, you know," Julia murmured, sliding onto the chair beside him. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Maya?" Julia nodded. "She wanted to know what you've been like these past few days, how you've been with the girls. She doesn't remember everything, Ethan, but her heart's waking up." He let out a sharp breath, running a hand over his face. "And what did you tell her?" Julia's smile was gentle. "That you've surprised me." They sat in companionable silence, the weight between them lighter than it had been all week. After a long moment, Ethan turned to her, a wry smile tugging at his mouth. "Julia," he murmured, "what am I supposed to do with a life that suddenly feels bigger than I know how to hold?" She sipped her tea, eyes glinting in the moonlight. You let it hold you right back. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Hartman leaned back in his chair, let the ocean breeze lift the weight from his shoulders, and wondered, with a mix of terror and hope, if he was finally ready to let it in. The following afternoon, the beach house Ethan had rented felt both too quiet and too loud. Maya sat on the wraparound porch, sunlight catching in the soft wisps of hair around her face as she watched the girls tumble in the sand below. Bella ran with her bunny trailing in one hand. Sophie shrieked with laughter as Olivia chased her along the waterline, and for a brief, shimmering moment, it almost looked like a normal family afternoon. But Maya's hands trembled where they rested in her lap. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, watching. She hadn't seen him yet, but he saw everything. The way she clenched and unclenched her fingers, the way her shoulders stiffened whenever one of the girls called "Mommy" across the yard, the way her eyes softened and confused in the same breath. It was a beautiful day, but it was laced with the weight of memory trying to stitch itself back together. Ethan stepped out quietly, his loafers whispering against the old wooden planks. He crossed to her, crouching slightly to catch her gaze. "Maya," he said gently, "do you want me to bring them in for a break?" Her head snapped up, startled, and then softened. "No," she murmured. "Let them play a little longer." She exhaled, her fingers knotting together again. "It's good to hear them laugh." Ethan pulled up a chair beside her. For a moment they both watched the girls in silence. The sea breeze tangled through their hair, salt and sunlight filling the spaces between them. "I should remember more, shouldn't I?" Maya whispered finally, her voice tight. "It's been days. Bits and pieces come, but it's like trying to hold water in my hands." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that the girls were happy just having her near, that the laughter in the yard meant more than any perfect memory. But another part of him, the part that had always admired Maya's fierce independence, knew she needed to say this, to own it. "You're here," he said softly. "That's a hell of a lot more than they had 2 weeks ago." Maya let out a shaky laugh, one hand rising to brush at the corner of her eye. "And you?" she asked suddenly, glancing at him. "How are you holding up?" The question took him off guard. For years no one had asked Ethan Hartman that without wanting something in return. Investors wanted reassurance. Employees wanted direction. The press wanted a soundbite. But Maya, even fractured, even half-lost, just wanted to know. He rubbed the back of his neck, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth. "I'm improvising." She studied him for a long moment, her brow furrowed slightly. "I always thought you'd be untouchable by now," she murmured. "Even back then you were so sharp, so polished." Her eyes softened. "But you're different now." He swallowed hard. "You say that like it's a good thing?" "It is." She smiled faintly. "You're softer at the edges." Ethan let out a low laugh. "Don't tell the shareholders." Maya laughed too, a warm, surprised sound that tugged something loose inside him. But just as quickly, the moment shifted. The sliding door opened behind them, and Julia stepped out, her face pinched with concern. "Mr. Hartman," she murmured. "Lucas just called." She handed over Ethan's phone, her gaze flicking between him and Maya. Ethan's stomach tightened as he took it. "Lucas," he said quietly, stepping a few paces away. "What's going on?" Lucas's voice came through, rough and direct. "Media's caught wind of Maya. Someone leaked it to the press, that she's alive, recovering, here with you. And Ethan, they're circling. You need to prepare." Ethan closed his eyes, a curse slipping under his breath. He turned back, meeting Maya's gaze. For a heartbeat he saw it. The flash of fear, the sudden tightening in her shoulders, the fragile peace between them splintering at the edges. Maya stood, her arms crossing instinctively over her chest. What did he say? Ethan exhaled slowly, raking a hand through his hair. The media knows. About you, about the girls, about us. For a moment, Maya looked like she might crumble. Then, almost imperceptibly, she squared her shoulders. Of course they do, she murmured. This is your world, Ethan. Her words weren't cruel, but they were sharp enough to cut. Ethan took a step closer. I can protect you, he said, low and firm. I will protect you. Maya's eyes glistened, her voice softening. I don't need you to protect me, Ethan. I just need you to stand beside me. And just like that, the old tension was back. The unspoken reckoning they'd run from for years. Ethan drew a slow breath, his heart pounding. I didn't stand beside you last time, he said, voice raw. But I'm not walking away again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya reached out, hesitant, searching, and curled her fingers around his. And in the quiet, in the sharp, salt-stung air, Ethan felt the first fragile stitch of something new begin to form. The next morning dawned hazy, the sky smudged with gray as though even the weather sensed the weight pressing on Ethan's chest. From the balcony, he watched reporters gather on the narrow road leading to the beach house, cameras already pointed at the driveway. His private security team had set up barriers, but Ethan knew better than anyone that walls were rarely enough. Inside, the house felt charged. Olivia and Sophie were curled up on the living room rug, coloring quietly but glancing toward the windows every few minutes. Bella sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs under the stool, Bunny tight in her arms. And Maya stood by the sliding door, arms folded, watching the commotion outside. Ethan crossed to her, his heart tight. I can move you, he murmured, his voice low, just for her. Somewhere private. I can have you and the girls on a plane within 2 hours. My team can... Maya turned, her gaze sharp. Ethan. He fell quiet. I'm not running, she said, her voice steady despite the faint tremble in her hands. I've done enough of that. For a long moment they stood there, facing each other, two people still trying to figure out what they were now, after years apart, and a storm of memories still half lost. Ethan exhaled. You don't have to do this in the spotlight. I'm not doing it for the spotlight, she shot back gently. I'm doing it for them. She tilted her chin toward the girls. They need to see that I'm here, that I'm staying. His throat tightened, something raw and unfamiliar twisting inside his chest. He wasn't used to being the one asked to stand still, to let someone else lead. I need you to be okay with this, Maya added, softer now, because I'm not hiding. Not from this. Not from you. Ethan reached up, scrubbing a hand over his jaw, then nodded once. Okay, he murmured. Okay. That afternoon, the lawyer arrived. Ethan hadn't told Maya about the custody issues looming, hadn't wanted to add to the avalanche of burdens she was carrying. But Claire had called that morning, her voice tight with concern, warning him that questions were being raised. Questions about Maya's disappearance, about the girls' well-being, about Ethan's sudden presence in their lives. Publicity like this, Claire had warned, makes people nervous, Ethan. You need a plan. So now, as the lawyer sat on the back patio, papers spread across the table, Ethan watched Maya's expression tighten. I'm not signing anything, she said quietly, the edge in her voice unmistakable. Ethan raised his hands. Maya, just listen, please. She paced, arms folded tightly over her chest. You think you can fix this with contracts? With money and signatures and deals? This isn't one of your boardrooms, Ethan. He felt the hit like a slap, sharp and clean. No, he said slowly, but it is our daughter's future. And I'm not going to let anyone take them from you, or from me. Maya's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the tension broke. Something flickered across her face, a flash of vulnerability, of all the terror she was holding inside. "Do you," she whispered, barely audible, "do you really want that?" Ethan's chest tightened, his voice rough as gravel. "More than anything." Maya's shoulders sagged as if the fight had drained from her all at once. She sank into the nearest chair, her face crumpling into her hands. Without thinking, Ethan was beside her. He crouched, one hand resting lightly on her knee, his other brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I can't fix this," he murmured. "I can't buy it or control it or sign it away. But I can be here, and I can stand beside you, like you asked." For a long moment, Maya didn't move. Then, slowly, her hand found his, fingers trembling, clutching his like a lifeline. That night, after the girls were tucked into bed and the house had gone still, Maya stood on the porch alone. Ethan joined her quietly, a blanket slung over one shoulder. He draped it across her shoulders without a word, and leaned on the railing beside her. The moon hung low over the water, silver light stretching across the waves. "I'm terrified," Maya confessed softly, "of failing them, of failing you." Ethan turned, his eyes softening. "You don't owe me anything, Maya." She let out a breathless laugh. "That's the problem. I feel like I do." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You're here," he murmured. "That's all I ever wanted." For a moment she leaned into his shoulder, letting the silence stretch between them, warm and tentative. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, I think I'm starting to remember what it felt like to love you." Ethan's breath caught, and for the first time in years he didn't reach for the next move, the next solution, the next strategy. He simply stood there, holding her hand, holding the night, and let himself hope. Morning came with the low rumble of voices outside the beach house. Ethan pulled back the curtain and exhaled sharply. The press had doubled overnight. Reporters clustered at the barricades, cameras raised like weapons, eager to catch a glimpse of the reclusive billionaire, the amnesiac mother, and the three girls America was suddenly fascinated by. Behind him, the house was slowly stirring awake. Sophie's small footsteps padded across the hardwood, Olivia called for breakfast from the kitchen, and Bella, always the quiet observer, sat cross-legged by the window, watching Ethan as much as she was watching the crowd. He raked a hand through his hair, the weight of the morning pressing heavy on his shoulders. He had been so sure just days ago that he could shield them all. But this was the part of his world Maya had always feared, the part that devoured privacy, chipped away at trust, and left families scattered in its wake. He heard the soft sound of Maya's voice before he saw her. "I thought I was ready for this," she murmured from behind, her arms crossed over her thin sweater. "But it's like stepping into someone else's life." Ethan turned, his breath catching for just a moment. The morning light played in the edges of her hair, her features still pale but sharper now, less ghost-like. She was here, more here than she'd been in weeks, but still caught between the woman she was and the fragments she was trying to reclaim. "I know," Ethan said softly. "I don't think you should have to face it at all." Maya's gaze flicked toward the window. "But we can't hide forever, can we?" "No," Ethan admitted, a hollow laugh slipping from his throat. "And I'm realizing that's a lesson you learned long before I did." She gave a faint, almost bittersweet smile, and for a moment, Ethan felt the familiar ache pull through his chest, the one that had started the day she walked away, the one that never quite left. By mid-afternoon, the girls were restless. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor trying to braid Sophie's hair, while Olivia flipped through an old photo album Julia had found in the hotel office. Bella hovered by the door, pressing her face to the window, as if the sight of the reporters anchored her to the moment. Ethan stood near the kitchen, arms folded, phone buzzing non-stop in his pocket. Claire was handling the media. The board was sending warnings. Investors wanted answers. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he cared if they got them. "Come sit," Maya called softly, patting the floor beside her. Ethan hesitated. "Please," she added, her voice gentler, her eyes flicking to his. He crossed the room and lowered himself beside her, feeling strangely clumsy, like a giant among tiny creatures. Bella crawled into his lap without a word. Sophie leaned her weight against his back, and Olivia reached to tug at his sleeve, pulling him into their circle. Maya watched, something tender and fragile warming her expression. "I don't remember every detail," she whispered. "But watching this, I think I remember how it felt to love you." Ethan's heart gave an uneven kick. He swallowed. "And?" His voice was rougher than he meant, thinner around the edges. Maya's eyes shone with quiet sadness. "And I think I remember how afraid I was, too." The words settled between them like a hush, soft but impossible to ignore. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Maya, I left because I didn't know how to matter in your world," she murmured, her fingers moving gently through Sophie's hair. "Because every time I tried to tell you what I needed, I felt like I was just background noise." Ethan flinched as if she'd touched a bruise. He wanted to argue, to explain, to say the right thing. But all that came was a quiet, raw confession. "I was scared too." Maya looked up sharply. "I was terrified," Ethan went on, his voice low, "that if I let go of the life I'd built, the company, the power, the control, I wouldn't know who I was without it. And maybe I was afraid that you wouldn't love the man underneath it all." The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the girls breathing. Maya reached across the small space between them, her fingers brushing his. "I don't know who I am right now," she whispered, "but maybe we can figure it out together." For a long, breathless moment, Ethan just held her gaze. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he laced his fingers through hers and held on. That night, the security lights flickered across the yard, throwing long shadows against the house. Ethan stood alone on the porch, phone pressed to his ear as Claire rattled off updates. Legal teams on standby, PR damage control, options for relocation. But Ethan's eyes were fixed on the window, where Maya sat curled on the couch with the girls, Bella's head on her lap, Olivia's feet tucked under a blanket, Sophie snoring softly into Maya's side. "I'll call you in the morning, Claire," he murmured, his voice unexpectedly steady. "But I'm not leaving tonight." As he ended the call, the door creaked open behind him. Maya stepped out, barefoot, blanket draped over her shoulders, her expression uncertain but open. "You're still here," she said softly, almost like it was a surprise. Ethan turned, a slow smile pulling at his mouth. "I told you, I'm not walking away." Maya looked at him for a long moment, the hush of the night wrapping around them like a breath. Then, with the faintest curve of a smile, she reached for his hand, and in the quiet that followed, neither of them needed to say a word. The storm arrived just before midnight. Ethan had been lying awake, listening to the girls' soft, even breaths from the next room, when the first crack of thunder shook the windows. By the time the rain pelted against the glass, Sophie was already in the doorway, clutching her blanket, with Olivia close behind and Bella trailing silently, Bunny pressed tight to her chest. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Come here, you three," he murmured, reaching out as they rushed to his side. Maya appeared in the doorway a moment later, her hair loose over her shoulders, an uncertain look on her face. "They're scared," she whispered, stepping into the room. Ethan shifted to make space on the bed, patting the spot beside him. "So am I," he said softly, offering a tired smile. Maya hesitated, then sat carefully, pulling Bella into her lap as Sophie and Olivia curled on either side of Ethan. Outside, the storm battered the house, wind rattling the shutters, rain sweeping against the roof in waves. But inside, in the small pool of lamplight, the five of them huddled together, a patchwork family learning, minute by minute, how to belong to one another again. Maya smoothed Bella's hair absently, her fingers brushing over the edge of the eye patch. "She's brave," she whispered. "Aren't they all?" Ethan felt his throat tighten. "They're stronger than either of us," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of Sophie's head as her eyes fluttered closed. Maya's gaze flicked to his, warm and weighted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, she said, "I remember a little more every day." Ethan swallowed hard. "Tell me." Maya looked down at Bella, her fingers still in motion. "I remember singing to them when they were babies. I remember falling asleep on the couch with one on my chest. I remember laughing. With you." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Ethan's hand found hers across the bedspread, their fingers tangling without effort. "I remember," Maya added quietly, "how lonely it felt, even when you were in the same room." Ethan flinched. "Maya." "No." She shook her head gently. "You need to hear this." Outside, another boom of thunder shuddered through the house. The girls burrowed deeper into the blankets. Maya drew a long breath. "I loved you, Ethan, but I didn't know how to live inside your life. I didn't know how to compete with everything that mattered to you." The words slid into the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Ethan closed his eyes for a long moment, pressing his forehead to his clasped hands. "I didn't make you compete," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to be without all of it." Maya gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Maybe we were both learning in the wrong direction." They fell silent, listening to the rain drum its steady rhythm against the roof. The room was warm and dim, the girls breathing, softening into sleep. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was raw around the edges. "I can walk away, Maya. From the boardroom, from the company, from all of it. I don't need to win anymore." Maya's eyes flickered to his, something sharp and searching in her expression. "I don't want you to walk away," she murmured. "I just want you to walk toward us." For a moment, Ethan's breath caught, the knot in his chest pulling tighter, and then, slowly, beginning to loosen. He let his head fall back against the headboard, a low, unsteady laugh slipping from his throat. "I was so sure I needed to prove something." Maya reached over, resting her palm against his cheek, her thumb brushing along the faint roughness of his jawline. "You only ever needed to be here," she whispered. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and the world outside glistening with leftover rain. Ethan woke to find Bella curled between them, Olivia sprawled half across his chest, and Sophie wedged into the crook of Maya's arm. His arm had fallen asleep sometime in the night, and his neck ached, but he'd never felt so at peace. Maya stirred beside him, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She gave a small, sleepy smile, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes. "We're a mess," she murmured. Ethan brushed a kiss over her temple. "We're a beautiful mess." The knock on the door came just as they were untangling from the pile of limbs and blankets. It was Julia, her face pale, a folded newspaper in her hand. "You need to see this," she murmured, her voice tight. Ethan unfolded the front page slowly. The headline stretched across the top in bold, merciless letters. "Billionaire Ethan Hartman and the woman who vanished. The family he kept secret." Below was a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of Maya stepping out onto the beach, the girls laughing around her, and Ethan close behind, his gaze fixed not on the cameras, but on them. Maya's face blanched, her hand flying to her mouth. Ethan exhaled, his jaw tightening, the old instinct to shield, to fix, to control slamming hard into his chest. But then, slowly, he felt Maya's fingers slip into his, her grip sure, grounding him where he stood. And in that moment, Ethan Hartman realized this wasn't the disaster he feared. It was the life they were going to have to fight for, together. Ethan had faced crisis before, hostile takeovers, market crashes, scandal, but none of it felt like this. By noon, the quiet sanctuary of the beach house had been replaced with a circus. Reporters crowded beyond the driveway barricades, drones hovered along the cliffs, and camera flashes flickered through the hedges. Ethan's security team worked in tense silence. Julia coordinated deliveries and decoys, and Claire's voice buzzed through his earpiece, rattling off options. "We can move you to the Vineyard estate or fly you out tonight. Ethan, the board is pressuring for a statement." Maya sat at the kitchen table, clutching a chipped mug of tea as if it were the only steady thing left in the world. Her eyes lifted as Ethan entered, the shadows under them darker today, her shoulders set in a quiet, resigned line. "I can make this go away," Ethan said softly, sliding into the chair beside her. Maya gave a faint, tired smile. "Can you?" He faltered. For the first time, the billionaire who could bend the world to his will felt small before a woman holding a simple cup of tea. "I can try," he murmured. "I can get you somewhere safe. The girls. We can disappear until the press dies down." Maya's fingers tightened around the mug. "That's not what I meant." She set the cup down carefully, looking at him with eyes that were clearer, sharper than they had been in weeks. "I meant," she said, "you can make this go away." She gestured softly, at the house, the noise, the chaos outside. "You can run, or you can stay." Ethan sat back, heart pounding. "And if I stay?" "Then you have to stop trying to control everything," Maya whispered, "including me." The words hung in the air, weighty and unforgiving. For a moment, Ethan felt his usual instincts flare. Tighten the plan, double the security, draft the statement. But beneath that old, familiar reflex was something else now, something quieter, something that looked like surrender, but felt a lot like love. He reached across the table, covering Maya's hand with his. "I'm scared too," he said simply. Her lips parted in a faint, surprised breath. "I'm scared of losing you again," Ethan continued, his voice rough. "Of failing the girls, of showing the world a version of me that's less than perfect." Maya's fingers curled into his, the hint of a smile flickering at the edges of her mouth. "I don't need perfect, Ethan. I never did." The tension inside him softened, slowly, then all at once. Later that afternoon, Lucas arrived. He tossed a folder onto the kitchen table, dropping into the nearest chair with his usual unruffled charm. "Custody papers are coming," he warned quietly. "Maya's disappearance, the amnesia, the media attention. It's drawing eyes. CPS is under pressure to investigate." Maya went still. Ethan felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the old boardroom fury bubbling to the surface. But this time he caught it, drew a breath, met Maya's gaze. "We fight this together," he said calmly. Maya nodded, her throat working around a tight swallow. "Together." Lucas leaned forward. "But you need to get ahead of this. Publicly. A press conference, a statement. You can't hide here forever." Ethan looked at Maya. "Are you up for that?" Maya's shoulders rose and fell on a long breath. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to try." That evening, as the girls tumbled on the floor with blocks and dolls and belly laughs, Maya pulled Ethan aside to the porch. The sun dipped low, casting the world in a soft amber glow. The ocean stretched to the horizon, peaceful despite the storm of cameras and headlines waiting just beyond the gates. Maya turned to face him, her hair swept back by the breeze. "I'm afraid I'll let you down," she said softly. "That when the cameras come, when the questions start, I'll freeze. I'll fail." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing along the curve of her jaw. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself, Maya." She let out a shaky laugh. "I don't even know who that is yet." His lips curved, gentle and sure. "Neither do I," he whispered. "Maybe we figure it out together." Maya leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "I missed you," she murmured. "Even when I didn't remember, I missed you." And for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, Ethan let himself believe they weren't standing at the edge of an ending, but at the fragile, terrifying beginning of something new. The day of the press conference arrived with a cold, gray sky pressing over the beach house. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with nerves. Claire was on the phone in the kitchen. Julia shuffled the girls into the playroom with a basket of toys, and Lucas stood by the front window, arms crossed, watching the reporters set up on the lawn. Ethan adjusted his tie in the mirror, the knot feeling tighter than usual. He was used to this, the cameras, the statements, the headlines. But today wasn't about quarterly earnings or shareholder reassurance. Today was about Maya. Maya, who sat quietly on the edge of the bed, wearing a simple blue dress Julia had brought over, her fingers twisting in her lap. "You don't have to do this," Ethan murmured as he crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. She let out a breathy laugh. "Yes, I do." He brushed his knuckles along her cheek, feeling the tremble just beneath her skin. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to the cameras, not to the world, not to me." Maya's lips curved faintly. "Maybe not, but I have to prove it to myself." For a long moment they stayed like that, the hum of voices outside fading into a soft, pulsing silence between them. Then Maya drew a steady breath and rose to her feet. "Let's go." The press gathered on the lawn in a semicircle of flashing cameras and murmured questions. Ethan stood at the edge of the patio, his hand resting lightly at the small of Maya's back as they approached the microphones. The girls watched from an upstairs window, their faces pressed to the glass, Bella's small hand tapping the pane in a rhythmic, anxious beat. Maya stepped forward, her shoulders stiff at first, her throat working around the first words. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice thin but clear. "I know many of you have questions. I wish I had all the answers." The crowd hushed, a sea of lenses tilting toward her. "I've been through something I can barely understand myself," she continued. "But what I do know is this. My daughters are my heart, my anchor, and my reason for finding my way home." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, softening just enough to pull at his chest. "I am grateful for the people standing beside me now," Maya added, her fingers brushing along the edge of the podium. "We are not perfect. We are rebuilding, but we are a family." The applause was tentative at first, then warmer, swelling under the gray sky. Ethan stepped up beside her, his hand slipping naturally into hers as the reporters called questions he had no intention of answering. Not yet. For today, this was enough. Later, after the cameras packed away and the security team ushered the crowd off the property, Maya sat barefoot on the porch steps, the blue dress traded for jeans and a soft sweatshirt. Ethan brought her a mug of coffee, lowering himself onto the step beside her. "You were incredible," he murmured. Maya let out a small laugh, curling her fingers around the mug. "I was shaking the whole time." He reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "They saw your heart, Maya. That's all they needed. For a long moment, she watched the waves roll against the shore, the horizon blurring into the soft gold of a fading afternoon. "You were always good at carrying the world on your back," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to stand beside you without disappearing." Ethan's breath hitched. "You were never invisible," he said softly. "I was just too blind to see you." Her gaze lifted, meeting his. "I don't want to go back to how we were," she murmured. "Not the old us. Not the version where you were chasing more and I was shrinking smaller." Ethan's chest tightened as he reached for her hand. "Neither do I," he whispered. For a moment, the wind tangled between them, lifting the edges of their sleeves, pulling their fingers together until they laced, sure and steady. Inside the house, the girls' laughter bubbled through the walls, a reminder that there was no going back, only forward. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hartman was ready to walk toward a future he hadn't built, purchased, or planned. A future that, finally, felt like home. The house was quiet that night, except for the rhythmic crash of the ocean against the shore and the occasional creak of the old floorboards as the girls shifted in their sleep upstairs. Ethan sat in the living room, a single lamp casting a warm pool of light over the couch where Maya had curled up in the corner. She hugged a pillow to her chest, her knees tucked beneath her, eyes tired but awake. "I should feel relieved," Maya murmured, her voice soft. "We survived the press. We got through the storm. But I can't stop wondering, what's next?" Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced together. "What do you want next, Maya?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing faintly. "That's the problem. I don't know. I remember pieces of who I was, but it's like trying to fit back into a life that doesn't quite belong to me anymore." Ethan's chest tightened. "I used to think," he said quietly, "that I had to have everything mapped out. Every quarter, every project, every goal. And maybe that worked for a company. But for us—" He gave a faint, rueful smile. "It didn't." Maya's gaze flicked to his, searching, softening. "What if we stopped trying to fix the past," Ethan murmured, "and just figure out today?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya set the pillow aside, rising slowly from the couch and crossing the room. She sat on the armrest beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint brush of her hair against his cheek. "I want to believe we can," she whispered. Ethan turned, his fingers finding hers, wrapping around them with quiet certainty. "We can." But just as the space between them softened, as the fragile new closeness settled, Ethan's phone buzzed sharply on the table. The moment cracked like thin glass. With a quiet sigh, he reached for it, glancing at the screen. "Claire." Again. Maya gave a small, knowing smile. "Go on," she murmured. "It's your world calling." Ethan looked at her for a beat longer, then silenced the call and set the phone back down. "I'm where I need to be," he said softly. Maya's smile faltered, then bloomed into something gentler, something that touched the edges of her eyes. "That," she murmured, "is new." Later that night, long after the house had gone still, Ethan lay awake in the dim room, the ocean whispering through the open window. He could hear the faint creak of the hallway floorboards. Maya checking on the girls again. When she returned, she didn't climb into the guest room bed. Instead, she hesitated in his doorway, barefoot, one hand resting lightly on the frame. "Can't sleep?" he murmured, lifting his head slightly. She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping. "They're all piled into one bed. Bella's arm is wrapped around Olivia's neck like a scarf." Ethan chuckled, patting the empty space beside him. "Come here." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she crossed the room and slipped beneath the covers, pulling the blanket to her chest, exhaling a slow, trembling breath. They lay in the dark for a long moment, the only sound the ocean's steady pulse. "I'm scared," Maya whispered. Ethan reached across the space, finding her hand beneath the blanket. "Me too. Not just of the press," she added, her voice smaller now. "Of falling back into old patterns. Of us. Breaking again." Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. "I can't promise we'll be perfect," he murmured. "But I can promise I'm not the same man I was. And I don't want to build the old life. I want to build something better." Slowly, tentatively, Maya turned toward him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Something better," she echoed softly. In the hush of the room, in the warmth of shared breath, and the weight of all they had almost lost, Ethan felt something shift. Something that no boardroom, no contract, no carefully negotiated deal had ever given him. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't control. It was the quiet, astonishing relief of simply being chosen again. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hartman let the future come without a plan. Morning broke soft and golden over the beach house, sunlight slipping through the curtains and pooling on the hardwood floors. Ethan stirred first, the familiar weight of responsibility already pressing at the edges of his chest. But then he felt the lighter weight tucked against his side, and for a moment everything inside him went still. Maya. Her breath was soft, her forehead resting just below his collarbone, one hand curled loosely near his chest. Ethan lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the unsteady rhythm of his own heart. This, he thought, was what it was to stop running, to stop building walls out of work, money, and power. When Maya finally stirred, it was with a faint hum, a lazy stretch, and a quiet murmur of morning, as if they had been doing this for years. He smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning," he murmured, and meant it more deeply than he'd ever expected. But peace was a brief visitor. Moments later, the girls burst into the room, Olivia leading the charge, Sophie close behind, and Bella bringing up the rear, Bunny in tow. "Mommy," Olivia shouted, half launching onto the bed. "Can we go to the beach today? Can we build a sandcastle? Can we?" Maya laughed, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in so long it almost broke him. She pulled them close, kissing the tops of their heads, murmuring, "Yes, yes, one thing at a time." Ethan sat back, watching the tangle of arms and giggles, a knot forming low in his chest, part joy, part fear. Because even as he sat in this perfect fleeting moment, Claire's texts buzzed on his phone from the nightstand. The board was demanding answers. Shareholders were rattled. His absence had stretched too long, and the world he had once ruled was beginning to wobble without him. He rose quietly, slipping from the room and stepping out onto the porch. The sea stretched wide and calm in front of him. He gripped the railing, the familiar tension coiling through his shoulders. He could fix this, a call, a flight back to the city, a weekend of meetings. But something in him resisted. He heard the door open behind him. Maya stepped out, a blanket draped over her shoulders, hair still mussed from sleep. She leaned beside him, resting her forearms on the railing. "They're asking you to come back," she murmured, not as a question, but as a quiet truth. Ethan let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah." Maya was silent for a long moment. "Do you want to go back?" He hesitated. "I used to think I couldn't survive without it," he said honestly. "That if I walked away, I'd lose myself." "And now?" she asked softly. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. "Now, I think I'd lose myself if I left this." Maya's mouth curved, tender and bittersweet. "You're a hard man to share with the world, Ethan Hartman." He gave a low laugh, reaching for her hand. Maybe the world can wait a little longer. For a moment, they simply stood there, fingers entwined, the ocean humming its steady rhythm below. Later that afternoon, Ethan gathered the girls by the water's edge. Bella had the smallest shovel, Olivia organized the seashells, and Sophie directed the building crew with the gravity of a queen. Maya watched from a blanket under a wide-brimmed hat, her smile soft, her eyes following each movement with a blend of wonder and ache. Ethan crouched beside Bella, helping pack wet sand into a bucket. "You're good at this," Bella said seriously, glancing up at him. "Thank you, sweetheart." Ethan smiled. "No," Bella clarified, wrinkling her nose. "I mean this, being a daddy." Ethan's throat tightened so suddenly it stole his breath. He reached out, smoothing her hair back, voice rough as he whispered, "I'm still learning." Bella beamed and handed him the next bucket. From the blanket, Maya watched, her heart full, her mind still swimming with questions, but her body anchored in a peace she hadn't known in years. And for the first time since this tangle of past, present, and future had thrown them all together, she felt something that was almost enough to quiet the fear. Hope. That evening, as the sky turned lavender and the girls curled up exhausted in a pile of beach towels, Ethan and Maya walked the shore. "You know," Maya murmured, "we never did this back then." He looked over, curious. "Slow down," she clarified, smiling softly. "We never slowed down enough to just be in it." In us, Ethan let out a breath, his fingers brushing hers. "I don't want to miss it this time." Maya stopped, turning to face him fully, her feet sinking slightly into the wet sand. "Then don't," she whispered. In that fading light, with the ocean wrapping around their ankles and the stars just beginning to pierce the sky, Ethan gathered her close, not with the desperate pull of a man afraid to lose, but with the quiet, certain touch of someone finally learning what it meant to stay. And this time, they let the world wait. A week later, the beach house was quieter. The press had faded, the headlines softened. The world, restless as ever, had moved on to the next big scandal. But inside these walls, something rare and precious was unfolding. A family, learning how to stitch itself back together. Ethan stood in the kitchen barefoot, sleeves rolled, stirring pancake batter with Olivia perched on the counter beside him. Sophie set the table, her small brow furrowed in concentration, while Bella sat cross-legged on the floor, dressing her bunny for breakfast. Maya leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching it all with a quiet smile that came easier now, less like something borrowed from the past, more like something she was growing into again. Ethan caught her eye and grinned. "If the CEO thing doesn't work out, I have a future as a short-order cook." Maya laughed softly, crossing the room and stealing a piece of bacon off the plate. "You're not wrong." As they moved around each other, the girls giggling, the scent of coffee and syrup in the air, Maya felt it in her chest, a kind of fullness she hadn't known she was missing, and she saw it in Ethan too, in the easy bend of his shoulders, the quiet in his eyes, the way he no longer seemed to carry the whole world on his back. Later, when the girls were playing outside, Maya found him on the porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands as he stared out at the sea. "You're different," she said softly, sliding onto the step beside him. He turned, arching a brow. "I'm wearing flip-flops. That's pretty different." She smiled, nudging his arm. "Not just that." Ethan grew quiet, his gaze dropping to the rim of his cup. "I keep thinking about everything I almost missed," he murmured, "everything I thought I had to control, or own, or win." He looked at her then, eyes clear, voice steady. "I'm done measuring my life by what I can build or buy." Maya reached for his hand, fingers lacing with his. "And what about the company?" Ethan exhaled, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. I called Claire this morning. Told her I'm stepping back. I'll still be involved, but no more running the show. No more chasing the next thing at the cost of what's right in front of me. Maya's throat tightened, her heart catching in her chest. She squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. He leaned in, resting his forehead lightly against hers. I'm proud of us. That afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and the ocean turned molten gold, Ethan gathered the girls on the beach. He knelt in the sand, Bella tucked under one arm, Olivia braiding seaweed nearby, Sophie drawing patterns with a stick. Can I tell you a secret? Ethan murmured, brushing a hand over Bella's hair. All three girls turned toward him, eyes wide, ears sharp. I was scared, he said quietly. Scared when you showed up. Scared I wouldn't know how to be what you needed. Olivia crawled closer, resting her chin on his knee. Sophie wrapped her arms around his back. Bella looked up with those fierce, steady eyes. But you three, Ethan continued, voice thickening, you taught me how to stay. Maya watched from the porch, hand pressed to her heart, eyes blurring with tears. She didn't bother to blink away. Later, as the sky deepened into indigo and the first stars appeared, Ethan and Maya stood at the water's edge, toes sinking into the cool sand. You once told me, Maya murmured, that you didn't know who you were without all of it. The company, the success, the control. Ethan smiled faintly, slipping his arm around her waist. And now? She turned to face him, brushing her palm along his jaw. Now I see the man who was underneath it all along. He dipped his forehead to hers, eyes closing briefly as their breath mingled in the quiet between them. Thank you, Ethan whispered. For what? Maya asked softly. For choosing me again, he murmured, even when you didn't have to. Maya's lips curved, bittersweet and sure. We're both choosing, she whispered back. And with the moon rising high over the sea, the girls laughing in the distance, and the tide rushing in to kiss their feet, they stood there, two people who had learned, finally, how to let go of who they thought they had to be, and how to hold on to what mattered most. Not the empire, not the headlines, not the past, just this, just here, just home.